it's really amazing to me that so much emphasis is placed on the Almighty God as a male. I don't know how that idea, well, I'm sorry, I do know how that idea came about, but I don't know how it has been sustained for so many centuries and in so many different cultures, when the fact of nature is that the human species had no idea that the male of the species was in any way involved with the creation of another human being. We take it for granted now that a woman can only become pregnant if she is impregnated by a male. But for many, many hundreds of thousands of years, our primitive ancestors only thought that the female could produce a child, and that sexual intercourse was not in any way involved with that process. It's no different than an animal, a dog, cat, having kittens or puppies, and neither the male dog or the male cat has any idea or ever thought that he played a role in that. Only the mother knows, or only the mother of a human being, a mother of a kitten doesn't really know what went wrong or what happened, just gave birth to a litter. But in our primitive ancestors knew, of course, that babies come from the female, but they didn't know that the male had anything to do it. So all worship of a divine source was feminine. And that was true for thousands of years prior to our gaining full human consciousness, and long after we had human consciousness that we have now. That was considered, that was also part of, or the only knowledge we had. And we can trace really when this knowledge of the male role came into existence. It was probably about 11,000 years ago. We can't pinpoint it, but we do know that in the Bible, especially the Old Testament and the New Testament both, God created Adam first, and then he gave Adam a companion by taking a rib from Adam and blowing on it, and that rib then became a woman. And they were companions and went on to procreate. Now, that has caused so much pain in the world because male then took that knowledge. It's almost like taking the nuclear bomb and saying, I now have the knowledge to conquer all. Especially I can conquer my companion, the woman. And it always amuses me because there's one stanza in the Bible, it's in the book of Revelation actually, that is all bold-faced type. And there's no other paragraph that I've found or instance in the Bible where the type is made bold-faced. And that's where the woman is called the whore of Babylon and the scarlet woman and that monstrous woman. And in other words, so degraded and denigrated. One wonders why that paragraph shows up. Well, it's all to emphasize that the woman is inferior and should take a back seat for all decision making except what she's really meant for, to do the household chores, to rear up the children, and to make life pleasurable for the man. Look at all the harm that's done all over the world. Now, for the first time in the United States and in the Western world, the woman is being given partial due. And I hear talk among a lot of people that the church, the Roman Catholic Church, well, it's already granted the woman, the Virgin Mother, equality with Jesus, but it isn't emphasized. But I predict that in the next 50 years, the woman will be given exact, complete equality with the man insofar as all these spiritual matters we talk about. God the Father will be, I don't say omitted entirely, but it will be God, Mother, and Father, you know. How they will manage that, I'm not sure. But in many of the matriarchs, the god was the goddess. And in Egypt it was the same. In fact, there was a constant struggle in the whole history of ancient Egypt between dynasties and between the pharaohs and the worship in their religion. There were those who worshipped the goddess and those who worshipped, well, even those who worshipped the goddess worshipped her product, the boy, the little boy, in the form of Horus, was the son of the Virgin, the goddess. And then the opposing point of view, the worship of the little boy who was the son of the Father in heaven, the only begotten Son, that became the opposition. And those two factions, religious factions, vied for supremacy all through ancient history. Why this isn't taught in classes in Egyptology and why it isn't made known is a mystery to me. But if anyone studies Egyptology and the history of Egypt, they'll find, for example, the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and part of the 17th dynasties were almost laid to ruin by later dynasties. Because why? All the Egyptologists say that it was because the invasion of other societies, such as the Hyksos. They invaded Egypt and they laid ruins to all these dynasties. Well, that's not really true. The people who laid to waste the previous dynasties, such as the 13th, especially 14th and 15th and 16th, were just simply native pharaohs who worshipped the son of the father. Osiris was the father figure, and his son also was a Horus. But they called the son of the virgin goddess, they called him Sut or Seth. And that became Satan. So those who worshipped the little boy of the Virgin, which was the most logical because that's what had been done for thousands and thousands of years. They called him Sut because Sut was black, and I mean, we know what Sut looks like, soot, black. They called him Satan. And I have many history books of history of Egypt that were written in the 18th century and 19th century that all say this plainly, that they called him Satan. And that's just the same old thing. The male wanted to be the supreme ruler, and the feminine was suppressed.
So why do you think it is that this shift in the perception of women and the improvement in the recognition of women's power is coincident with the revelation, if you will, of Kundalini in our current time? Why are they together?
Well, because Kundalini has, from time immemorial, been considered feminine energy. So one wants feminine energy. You get feminine energy from the goddess. You don't get it by praying to an almighty male called God, give me the energy. Although you'd have to interview some of the Hindu priests who practice what's called Shaivism. Shaivism is more glory given to the male principle, Shiva. But really, I think one of the most striking things I've ever heard, Gopi Krishna told me that himself. He said, of course, meticulous records were kept all through history in India of those who became enlightened. It wasn't a simple thing like we have here. Anybody who cares to say so can call himself enlightened. There are many, many gurus who promise enlightenment to anyone who pays a certain amount of money and comes to a weekend seminar, when in fact, even in ancient times, it was very, very difficult to become enlightened. But an enlightened person was pretty much immediately recognized. They didn't make light of it. They had to prove their enlightenment by expressing tremendous knowledge of the ancient scriptures, etc. It wasn't an easy thing. But he said there can be found in India the records of 300 men who achieved enlightenment during a period of 500 years. And he said, so we have those records, but we have to find scholars who are willing to spend the time going to the various archives, because every dialect, every precinct, every state in India had its own priests and yogi masters and yoga masters, etc. So you're not going to find all 300 autobiographies in one place. But he said those who have made that kind of a study vouch for the fact that of those 300 men who achieved enlightenment, all but 2 were married. So how can 298 be married and only 2 not married? Just because heaven is not so arbitrary as to rule out the rule. And if that is so, that 298 became enlightened, were married, it means the woman is indispensable to a male's achieving enlightenment. So that makes the woman just indispensable. So you don't put a woman in second place and make a slave of her and tell her to walk 10 steps behind you and do all the menial work if she is essential for your salvation. Then she's equal. She should be put on a throne. She should be virtually worshipped because she is what allows you to become enlightened. Well, those were in the days when the matriarch, well, India is a kind of a peculiar situation because even though the learned know better and the priests all know better, they still want to keep the woman suppressed. I mean, look, it was only a very short time ago that a widow was practically treated like dirt. Gopi Krishna spent half his lifetime fighting for equal rights for widows. That was his prime social work, to give women the protection she needed and help she needed once she became a widow. But I've thought of that many, many times, the importance. So how can you treat a woman in a lower position if you have any thoughts at all of raising your consciousness?
So here we sit in modern day America in 2011, and we're both married. We both understand the importance of women in being the spiritual inspiration in our lives. And yet, when you start thinking about, well, that's one thing, but if you were to pray to God as a woman, that's a whole different concept. What happens if you start praying to God and you say, this God is a woman? What happens?
It takes a lot of practice. It's habit. That's all. It's just habit. When you think about it, metaphysically, God is the idea. The Big Bang started from nothing, right? But the concept of creation requires material to bring it into manifestation. So the Almighty God was the concept, the beholder of the concept. But before he could create or manifest the universe, he needed the material, the matter, the female. And that's how it should be viewed. God is still the Almighty idea. But if you want to achieve something in this world, best to pray to the person who supplies the material for it. And that's the woman. Look, just take biology. The male sperm is almost microscopic, or practically of no account. But look the size of the woman's egg. And she then furnishes everything in order to produce that child. But the idea of that child is manifested as the little sperm. So you have to look at it that way. If you really want to become enlightened, it's better to emphasize the woman, the goddess. But that doesn't slight the male God one bit. I mean, both participate to make the whole. But it's known all through, I think, all societies, that the child gravitates towards the mother. When anything goes wrong and when he needs something, he just turns to the mother. I mean, he grew up that way. He was suckled by the mother. He was cared for by the mother. The father may have contributed more even, but he was not there to be the source of comfort and pleasure for the growing child. I mean, we just have to look at the way it is and carry that over into the spiritual world or the spiritual aspirations. I mean, I took it upon myself to read Panchastavi about a page a day. That's all. And I suggested that to innumerable people. I mean the Sanskrit part, even though the translation of the Sanskrit. Just read that much a day, and it'll change your whole way of thinking. Okay, I just opened this at random. O Bhavani, that's just a word of endearment. Those devotees who see thee clearly like the crescent of the moon shining in the forehead, lighting from its depths the sky of the mind, those wise men soon become seers, and thou grantest all desires to these discerning souls full of faith. So if you want your wishes to be granted, turn your attention to the goddess. Just out of selfishness. Worship the goddess. I mean, it says it all the way through here. And Gopi Krishna says, the man who wrote these pages was at the highest state of consciousness. The highest state of consciousness. So what's he going to do? Lie to you? Or mislead you? I mean, he doesn't say, turn your attention, those devotees of God, Vishnu, or Shiva. No. Turn your attention to the goddess if you want to achieve enlightenment. And 298 men were all married who became enlightened during a certain period that they kept records.
This is going to be a personal question, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But what's happened in your life when you have been praying to the goddess and worshiping the goddess?
Everything.
Huh?
Everything.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, first of all, I could never have left Des Moines, just walked out and come to New York City and survived with 4 children in college and in high school. There was no possibility. I just couldn't do it. I came to New York and looked up at the buildings and say, I can't do it. What can I do? I can't walk in, try and get a job at a newspaper. They'd laugh me out of the office. Couldn't go to get a job at a advertising agency. They say, what's your experience? Well, I had a small advertising agency in Des Moines. They'd have kicked me out of the office. So I only had one thing, and that was the goddess. That's all. Now, I didn't kneel down and say, oh, goddess, keep me from drowning in this sea of evil. No, I pledged my support for Gopi Krishna, whose main thing in life was to present Kundalini to the world. Kundalini is the name of the goddess. You don't have to say goddess Kundalini. Kundalini is the goddess. It's just a strange name to the Western ear. But it is her name. So, and they gave her many other names of endearment, Bhavani, and daughter of the Himalayas. I don't think anybody knows why she's called daughter of the Himalayas, but I think I know, because our first ruling deity was the North Pole Star. And in all through mythology, whenever they want to talk about the guiding star, they talk about either a pillar or, like the church has, pillars, or sometimes a tree, but mostly a mountain. So in this sense, the Himalayas was the name of the mountain, was the goddess. O daughter of the Himalayas, daughter of Kundalini. So that's what I think.
Let's go just out a little bit further out.
Okay.
The Bible in the Old Testament talks about the light that never faileth. We talk about compasses, and we need to talk today about having a moral compass.
Right.
But the pole star, the North Star, is a very important part of our enlightenment, isn't it?
It is.
Well, tell us about that.
Well, our primitive ancestors had no guidance whatsoever. I mean, they only saw the sun born and the sun die. No sense of time. And you have to have a sense of time before you can even begin to develop the power of reason. So there had to be something that drew a circle. Otherwise, there could be no direction, no sense of encompassing anything. Everything was just like a dog. It's instinct. He follows his ability to sense odors. But primitive man discovered the first circle was when we all came from, we developed our sense of consciousness in the equatorial regions of Africa, although the race began in southern Africa. But by the time we migrated to the Ethiopic area of Africa, we began to get a sense of consciousness. And we noticed that the Great Bear constellation came up out of the horizon every night and drew a circle. So that was the first circle, and that was the drawn in heaven that sort of developed the brain to become encompassed in a circle. And then they saw that within that circle was one star that didn't ever disappear. There were many bright stars that they could focus on, but sooner or later they dipped below the horizon. And so what could they gain from that? It helped them for a little while, but it was lost. But the pole stars never moved. It did eventually, but for long periods of time it remained in the center, and the circle was drawn around it by the Great Bear constellation. So that's why the pole star became so important. I have 2 books upstairs that just show pole star worship. We call it worship, we shouldn't really say worship, all over the world. This man spent the better half of his entire lifetime just tracking down images. That's where he told us that the steeple and the pole were symbols of the pole star. You don't necessarily have to always say the pole star, you see the pole star, well, where's the pole star? The image of the pole star was the mountain, the pillar, the post, the steeple. The reason I picked Bethel as my publishing company because that was the pole star in Hebrew, or in the beginning of Judaism. Bethel, the little town, was, I don't know, I guess they must have erected a post or a pillar there. I'd have to look it up. I did track it down, but I can't recall all the images. But it's amazing how many times you see the pole star imaged as, something. I mean, every time I go past a church, I look at the steeple and I just say to myself, pole star, pole star. Everything's taken to symbolism. And that's what I'm doing with this new fiction book I'm working on, is showing how the Egyptians changed their symbols every time the sun entered or left one of the leading constellations. Like, for example, in the 12th dynasty, the sun was leaving the constellation of the bull and entering the sign of the lamb. And then Jesus was the Lamb of God. And he recruited fishermen because the sun was now leaving the constellation of the lamb and going into the constellation of the fish, Pisces. And now we're going into the constellation of Aquarius. And he was the waterman, and water is a symbol of the spiritual.
And this business of changing the symbols is very important to our understanding of who we are and where we are in time.
I would say so.
So we've had 2,000 plus years of a symbol of a fish.
Right.
And now the symbol is going to be the water bearer.
Yes.
And isn't it strange that one of the significant events of the last century was our ability to get out in space and get a picture of Earth, the water bearer,
Right.
and we could post it any place we want to, and everybody understands that symbol. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. It really is. I haven't given much thought to that, but you're absolutely right.
And so
It's changed everything.
yes, it has. And so if the symbols somehow or another have an energy of their own and they know when they have to be changed, then when you talked earlier about our individual consciousness being joined with the universal consciousness in this Kundalini experience, here's a good question. Is something about to happen, or are we going to create something that will impact our consciousness in a positive way?
We pray to God that it does happen. I thought for a long time it would be the knowledge of Kundalini, but I don't think so at the moment. But then we have quite a bit of time. I mean, I always think there's a deadline, and I wish I wouldn't, because it's not a happy thought to think that the inevitable will occur, simply because our leadership has no knowledge of what's going on. I don't see any leadership anymore, either in the intellectual circles or academic or science. No real leadership. The only ones that I see stand out as leaders are atheists, and that's not a good thing. And we don't have people who can even argue with these atheists. Every time a book is written by an atheist, such as Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and a few others, one or two at Harvard, well, they get all the publicity. They get interviewed on all the talk shows, their books get reviewed, but you bring out a book about God, I mean, they just don't make it. I don't understand why. I don't understand why our leaders in Washington are so blind to the reality. I mean, it seems like they can all be accused of being looking only after their own interests. We make it so nice for them to retire. They get everything. They vote themselves everything possible, the best medicine, the best retirement package, and the people just sit back and keep quiet. It's only in the last few months that there's been any consciousness of the inequality and inequities in the United States or in the Western world, and I'm hoping they don't have to be shut down because they have no power. The only power they have is the internet. They don't have the power of the media. But the internet is the one thorn in the side of justice.
So, when we think about this time that we're in, and right now we're in this incredible time, and lots of people are thinking 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Something is going to happen. Even some people say 5 p.m., December 21st, 2012, boom, we're going to hit the center of the Milky Way galaxy, or all this other stuff. When you look forward, what is coming?
Well, I think terrible times. Because even if there isn't a war, I mean, how can we even guarantee that the Taliban doesn't take over the nuclear arsenal owned by Pakistan? I'm sure that's the main reason we keep our army in Afghanistan, simply because of that nuclear arsenal. How many nukes? The latest I've heard is at least 80, And so I can't predict a rosy future. I don't care what these people who think they know something about the Mayan calendar, which I don't believe for a second they know anything about it, really. They always keep shifting. It's 2012 now, but it'll soon be 2013 or 2014, 2028. They made a mistake in their calculations or whatever. They're not able to think. I don't think they even read the newspaper, those people who start that.
Mm-hmm.
They ignore the reality.
So if you have people that are counseling that kind of thing, and they may be ill-informed, but what about this growing sense that is happening all over the world that something is about to happen?
I think it's just their feeling of that everything is very ominous. I mean, we announce a new, I think I just read in the New York Times that Israel now has acquired 15 bunker busters. That's not a defensive weapon. So that's just one sign. Then there's the Taliban that is, we think we've got them pretty much subdued a little bit. We got to stay a few more years longer. But if they, and that's why I believe we're staying in Afghanistan. I can't see any other reason why we would stay in Afghanistan, costing so much money when we don't have the money anymore, except that we want to be there to make sure that the nuclear arsenal owned by Pakistan is safeguarded. Because heaven help us if the Taliban would take control of the nuclear arsenal. So I think that's all in the subconscious of the race, the intelligent segment of the race. And they're thinking of any good news they can find anywhere, and if that means the end of the Mayan calendar and something good's going to happen, or we see so many young people now who display signs of spirituality and all that, well, they're clutching at straws. They're turning their back on reality, and I don't blame them. I mean, anytime I've talked to people about what is really happening, they say, I don't want to think about it. What can I do? I can't do anything. And it just slows me up in what I'm doing and doing to keep my family in food and pay the rent. I can't afford to be thinking about what might happen down the road. They don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about that I've got some disease. I don't want to think about it. That's all it is. It's not the reality. They can't point to anything that would suggest there really is something better around the corner, just around the corner.
So at the end of Gopi Krishna's book, which analyzes where we are right now, the present crisis,
right
at the last page, he says something to the effect, never forget, at the darkest hour, there is always hope.
We can't forget that. We can't. There is hope. I have hope. I have hope that some of these stubborn scientists will open up their mouths and talk about what we've been talking about. I can't see them doing that, but I have hope. What other hope do I have? That is the hope. I came from Iowa to New York because I had that hope. Even Gopi Krishna said when our first meeting, he says, I don't think there's much chance, but we'll give it a try. And he gave his life for it. So he had hope.
And the truth is, you've given your life for it as well.
Right, but I got more back than I gave.
Well, what's that mean?
I continue to receive more than I've given. Mm-hmm. In fact, all the while I was sinking the ship was sinking in New York, all the while, when the normal businessman would have said, I got to get out of what I'm doing, and I got to pound the pavement. And I always said, no, I'm going to do more for what Gopi Krishna stood for. That's my salvation, not knocking on doors and getting new clients. And we didn't sink. We stayed afloat. And that's still what I think today. Better to do, just as it says in Panchastavi, turn your attention to me, the goddess says, and I'll answer all your desires.
And that's the same thing that Jesus said when he said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these other things will be added unto you.
That's the divine revelation.
Yeah. Gene, where the geese are flying across the bay, the seagulls are calling for their mates and their dinner. Your dog has come up on the steps, and it's almost 6 o'clock in Stamford, Connecticut on October 10th, 2011. This has been an incredible moment.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Karen. Come all this way.
It's our pleasure.
Yes.
Let's all stay together for dinner.
That'd be lovely.
Well, let's do that.
Okay.
From Long Island Sound, as the tide is starting to come back in, and a few minutes from now, the moon will be coming up over the horizon. This is Chuck.
And this is Karen.
And we say thank you, Gene. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye from Long Island Sound. And have hope. The grace will prevail. Amen.